Clicking go live now. Going live. Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. We are trying this for a third time tonight. You are joining your co-host Greg Tompsett along with our very patient, very kind, very gracious guest Matt Parrino of NewYorkUpstate.com. Matt, how you doing?
I'm great, man. I just recharged the batteries. We took the kids out to Anderson's in Buffalo today. It's 73-cent cone day because it's their 73rd anniversary.
Dude.
And it was popping up there. A lot of people getting their ice cream on a August night in Buffalo before the first Bills game. So, no, it was a fun night, and I'm glad to be on with you.
Yeah, I feel like that's a win. If you got to go take the kids for ice cream and while I sweated and swore at my computer, I think you certainly got the better end of that deal.
Yes.
Good. Well, before we jump in here, we'll go through a couple of things. First, just a regular reminder, check out everything we have going on at cover1.net. A lot of really wonderful things happening and able to kind of check out what we have going back and forth. Updates coming from Rob Quinn, great video breakdowns from Eric. You got the fun podcast from Aaron and I normally, as well as the new one running out from Kevin and Jason. They've done a lot of really fun stuff there. So make sure to check out what we have going on. Lots of updates. The premium subscription is so worth it. We're about to really dive in full go here, so I can't talk about that enough. But I know I've had a fun time jumping on with a couple different platforms for you, Matt. What do you guys got going on over in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I mean, for all of our coverage on the beat, I love interacting with Greg and the whole team over at Cover One. You guys are awesome. I'm at Matt Parrino on Twitter. That's the best place to find me. But we're also doing a lot of stuff with Instagram. Our handle over there is at Buffalo Bills NY Up. And we just passed 1,000 followers, so thank you to anybody if that's one of you. And it's just a fun way. It's like an immediate way. I'm going to try to do a lot of stuff from the practice facility in Orchard Park this year. Go live right away. Try to figure out some fun times to engage with fans and bring you guys kind of up to the minute news and reaction to everything that's going on with this team. And hopefully it's a team that's a lot better than a year ago, and the interest holds out for much longer. But one thing I have learned is no matter what this team is doing, whether it's 2-7 start or whatever, people are engaged. So that's fun.
Yeah, no, Bills Mafia doesn't mess around. They don't particularly care if it's a rough day or if it's a wonderful season. Obviously, there's a few more bandwagon fans when it's a wonderful season, but the rest of Bills Mafia is going to be there for you no matter what. Why don't we go ahead and jump right in? I know there's a couple things that I think we're at a clean breaking point here where we're about to jump in for the real football end of things and being able to finally see a game tomorrow. But let's kind of get our bearings here of what we've seen so far in camp. So first, I'll just ask for some final thoughts on what you were able to see there every day now as kind of McDermott was able to get his groove and into the feel of things. What were some final thoughts on what you saw overall as we wrap things up at St. John Fisher?
I think one of the main things that I took away, and maybe it's recency bias and the fact that it just happened, but I was intrigued with Lesean McCoy's media scrum yesterday. I tweeted it out that I thought it was a little bit different, a different version of Lesean McCoy than I've experienced over the course of the last year. It seems like somebody that's maybe accepted, that maybe he isn't the guy anymore, or that there's a potential for him not to be the guy anymore, because while he said he's been told that he's the man, he said he welcomes the competition, and one of his main goals isn't so much the numbers anymore, because he feels like those will come if he puts the team first. And I think that that's interesting, because I think across the board for this thing to work out in the NFL, everybody has to have to buy in. You got to get that buy-in from everybody. And a guy like Lesean McCoy, who had a C on his jersey last year, I think that there were times when I don't know if that necessarily was the vibe that other people or other players were getting off of him, especially late in the season when he kind of scoffed at the idea that Kody Ford, an undrafted rookie, might be getting carries over him, when the suggestion was merely made because the playoffs were obviously out of the question, and Kody Ford was a guy that was probably going to be fighting for his roster life over the course of the offseason. So I think that Frank Gore has not only been good for this entire offense, but it's been good for Lesean McCoy. And I think that that's important for this offense because they need as many playmakers as they can find. And I think that if LeSean McCoy is in the right mindset, if he's focused, we forget last year going into the season, there was a lot of off the field distractions when it
Yeah, a
comes
lot
to
hanging over his
McCoy.
head.
Exactly. So I think now you get to hit the reset button. All that kind of stuff has calmed down, and he's in a good place because there's a lot of new faces on that offensive line. So no, I think one of my main takeaways is I'm very intrigued what we're going to see from that running back room.
No, I think it's a great point, and I think I don't know if you've had a chance to see it yet, but there was a really interesting collaborative piece on the Athletic today that all three, Tim, Joe, and Matt were able to put together. That they went around and pretty much asked the entire roster, "Hey, what would it be like if you were a rookie coming in and having LeSean McCoy and Frank Gore there to be able to kind of pick their brain and taking it from the perspective of what a benefit Devin Singletary has?" And I thought it was a really interesting read. So one, it got me kind of excited about Singletary, but it reminds you how incredible those guys are, and that if I really hope you're right in that LeSean has kind of accepted that role where he can still get the most touches out of everybody, but it's not going to be 70% him, 20% Gore, 10% Singletary. He might get 50% to Gore's 30% to Singletary's 20%, or maybe even a little bit closer to even. But if he's good with that and he can be fresh and just try to, really produce on those what might be 12 to 15 touches instead of the 18 to 20, I think he could be, really have a good renaissance here to take advantage of that and keep himself fresh to have another year or two out of this.
For sure. And I think also he's not getting any younger. He's 31 years old, and I think that what this kind of situation in that backfield presents for LeSean McCoy is when he has things going, when he's feeling good, he will get the bulk of the carries, and they'll ride him when things are going good. But when he needs a break, he said there was one play he came off the sidelines during camp. It was on one of the days that he was really running the ball well, and he said, "Man, today's great because I got my legs under me today," and that kind of stuck out to me because it's like, how many days does he not have his legs under him at 31 years old? And that's a real honest to goodness thing. You see Frank Gore at 36, he is out there like 20, 30 minutes before everybody else, stretching, going through drills. And, I just think that as you get older, it's not as easy to keep it going. But I think he's in the right mindset, and it'll be interesting. On the defensive side of the ball, I also want to bring up, I think that this defensive line has a real chance, from everything that I've observed over the course of the last 2 weeks and even back into the spring, to be really special. I think Ed Oliver, the way that he's figuring things out so quickly and so rapidly on a day-to-day basis. Listen, he comes in with the crazy skill set, with all the freakish athletic tools that you want to work with. I actually talked to Bill Tierlink last week about what Ed Oliver brings to the table, and I'm going to have a story on that hopefully tomorrow to preview the game, Ed Oliver's first preseason game. But he just said it's like, the only obstacle in front of him at this point is learning how to develop from a technique perspective, because if you just line up him versus the other guy, no one in that building is worried about Ed Oliver and what he's going to be able to do. And I think that's just going to open up so many more things for the guys like Jerry Hughes, Trent Murphy, who's looked great in camp, Shaq Lawson, maybe not as great, but still a great camp for Shaq Lawson. So, I think that's one of my big takeaways. Is I think that this team is going to rely on that defensive line this year, and I expect them to get a lot more pressure on the quarterback.
I like it. I think that carries us right in. I sent over a couple questions that we'll kind of run through here to give a few surprises and maybe some people who need to step up here as we get into it. So as we wrap up camp, who was your biggest surprise on offense of what you saw?
Yeah, so when we first put this out, or when you first sent me the rundown on this, I really wanted to say Ray McCloud but I think I went into this camp with a little bit of an expectation of Ray McCloud after seeing him in the spring. So I'm going to go with Tommy Sweeney.
Nice.
I think that he has just been, I remember when Dawson Knox went down and seeing the reaction on social media from Bills Mafia, and they're like, what are we going to do here? Who's going to be catching the balls from the tight end position? I talked to Lee Smith a couple of days ago, and he said, yeah, nobody's ever going to confuse me for a pass catching tight end. So, I think what Tommy Sweeney has shown in a very small sample size is that he has quickness. has reliable hands, and Lee Smith has been impressed with his route running ability. So Lee Smith's been in this league for a few years. He's seen a lot of different tight ends. He's played with some really good tight ends. For you to catch his eye at this point, that stuck out to me a little bit. And I think that Tommy Sweeney, this is, a kid that could make some serious ground in terms of this depth chart and we'll get to this later, but put Jason Croom in some serious roster trouble if he can have a big preseason.
No, I think it's a great call, and I think it's worth mentioning. I think a lot of people, especially those who aren't as in tune with the team as what you have been, it probably is fair to say Ray McLeod. I actually went along the lines of Devin Singletary because of on draft night, that wasn't the direction I wanted to go in the third round. I wanted a pass rusher there. I thought there were other talent on the board. I thought I was excited about the TJ Yeldon signing. I didn't understand adding it. And now I can't lie, between being there live at camp, being able to see him in person, seeing the feedback, seeing what everyone's comments were, so far today. You hear someone like Patrick DeMarco, who made the comment in that athletic piece that we touched on, saying that, hey, we can't talk about him in front of him because we don't want his head to get big. I don't want him to realize how good he's going to be. That's some serious praise to be able to put that kind of thing out there. So my positive surprise on offense was Devin Singletary, because I was really impressed for someone that I probably didn't give a fair chance to after draft night.
Yeah, and he's been skyrocketing up rookie dynasty fantasy league mock drafts.
Seriously, all over the place.
I did one today. I'm in a league back from college, and we do a rookie draft every year. It's not a keeper league; it's a dynasty league. So you keep the same roster
Forever.
every year. And Devin Singletary actually lasted to the end of the second round. But I've been doing some mock drafts, and he's going in the first round. So yeah, the Bills are super high on Devin Singletary, and what's I've really appreciated about spending some time around him. He's a very humble guy. I'm glad you brought out that athletic piece. So happy for Joe Buscaglia making his way over to the Athletic.
Yeah.
They got quite the dream team over there. And when he was telling me about this Devin Singletary story, every once in a while, Joe gets excited about something and his eyes get real big like this. And I could tell that he was going to drop a real fire piece with those three guys. But yeah, he's just a humble kid. They love his work ethic, and he just brings a different dynamic and some young juice to not only the run game, but I've been so impressed with his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield, which is something that he wasn't asked to do at Florida, but he told me they just didn't ask me to do it. Didn't mean I couldn't do it. He's so fluid when he catches the ball. A lot of times I feel like Lesean McCoy, when he catches the ball, he's really herky-jerky with his motion. He'll catch the ball and he'll have to contort his body in different ways, and he doesn't set himself up to, hit the ground running, so to speak, when he catches the ball, whereas Singletary, it's all one fluid motion. I've been really impressed with him. I think that's where maybe early on could be his biggest impact in the pass game.
I agree completely. It was a comment Aaron and I made when we were sitting there watching from the stands. They were doing some of just the one-on-one drills where linebackers were covering running backs. He was running a lot of those seam routes where it was just basically a fly pattern, but where you're pretty tight to the quarterback. And just like you said, his ability to turn, catch it very naturally, never double catching, never into the body, first grab every single time and tucking in stride without breaking any motion and continuing to go. It was pretty incredible to be able to see that. And like you said, it was reassuring to realize that, hey, it was probably a lot more of his usage than his capability at Florida Atlantic. So that was definitely something exciting to see.
Thank you for a more technical breakdown of how he catches the ball. I appreciate that. That's why we come to Cover One. We want the X's and O's. We want a little bit more jargon. I appreciate that. But also, I will say, there was one play in camp. It was one-on-ones, and he absolutely embarrassed Matt Milano. And I didn't even put it really out there and make a big deal out of it because it's Matt Milano, and the guy was playing at a Pro Bowl level last year, and he's coming off an injury. But man, if you could do that to Matt Milano, I think there could be some serious gains in the passing game for Devin.
No, he's obviously gotten people's attention. Let's flip over to the defensive side. We'll stay on the positive note here before we start to rattle some cages. What was your biggest surprise on the defensive side?
Cory Thompson, Lock City. I mean, I was talking to John Scott from Spectrum News the other day, and he brought up this point, and I have to agree with him. I think he's going to really push for some of Lorenzo Alexander's snaps. I think he's playing so well, and he seems so comfortable. Here's a real storyline that I think everybody should keep track of. A lot of these guys that were asked to play significantly larger roles than maybe they had thought going into the season. You talk about Cory Thompson, Mike Love, who was on the practice squad, Cam Phillips. They're not really playing with fear anymore. They know they're good enough. They're popping in practice. And Cory Thompson, to me, whether he's out there with the first team, the second team, or the third team, he's playing like one of the best guys on the field, and he just looks comfortable and like he knows his role in the system and he's executing every time. And I think you go and read some of these days where Josh Allen's having some struggles, or even Matt Barkley. Cory Thompson's kind of a reason for that to a degree, because he's been really good in coverage, and he doesn't put himself in a position to make a mistake. And that's a big deal in Sean McDermott's defense. He loves guys that don't give up the big plays.
Yeah, I love that. And I really like the idea that, he's a guy who never really got a fair shake. Honestly, fairly similar to Robert Foster. He was a 5-star recruit going into LSU, then just had injury after injury, never could really get it going, ended up applying for a 6th year of eligibility, finally walked on as a kind of an undrafted free agent that the Bills gave a shot, spent a long time on the practice squad, and now you can't get him off the field. Like you said, it was every single special teams unit. He was on the first run of that. And I didn't even think about the fact of pushing Zoe, for reps this year, but, having that kind of problem is pretty incredible to be able to look at. So I know he was actually really similar to Milano as far as, former college safety who converted to linebacker, similar size, 6'1", 6'2", 220, 230 in that kind of modern NFL outside linebacker mold, and just really excited to see a guy like that go. I actually would have gone on a similar route, but I want to give a little bit of love to Mike Love. I was really looking at, obviously Camp Darling, Eddie Yarborough coming back. I was a fairly big fan of Eli Harold. I actually was fairly impressed with Daryl Johnson. I think he deserves a little bit of love, but Mike Love was everywhere. Like every single time it was a guy coming in when they gave, anyone a day off or having anybody rest the day, Jerry Hughes gets a little bit of rest. Mike Love was right there. It wasn't even a rotation. He was definitively a good half step ahead of those guys. So just a couple of names like that I wasn't quite expecting coming in.
Yeah, Mike Love has been turning a lot of heads, and he could have been the pick here as well. I don't think that he has the opportunity for as big of a role
Agreed.
this season because of how well. But then again, I shouldn't say that, because we know Trent Murphy's injury history, and he's predominantly that number 2 guy on the left side. So anything could happen.
Yeah, I do expect it. I think there'll be a healthy 8 men on the defensive line, but it does kind of seem that instead of 4 guys at each spot getting even reps, it does seem like Mike Love and Harrison Phillips might be a little half step behind, and it might be kind of a 3-man rotation with, Oliver Starr and Jordan Phillips at D tackle, and the same idea with Jerry, Trent, and Shaq at defensive end, with the other guys mixing as needed. But obviously it's early to kind of get to that kind of projection.
Yeah, and we'll also, with that, I'd be interested to see. I'd be not surprised if Sean McDermott's maybe holding a few of his cards, because I think there's been a few reps and it's been very sparse. It hasn't been a ton of looks, but when Shaq Lawson flips inside, he is so dangerous out of that, almost like that hybrid 3-tech role. And I just think that there's so many versatile parts of this defense. Jordan Phillips, I think he could be just as good as Starr at times in the 1-tech role because of his size and power. So yeah, Sean McDermott has a ton of toys to play with on this defensive line.
No, it's a great point, and I think I can't remember who was mentioning it. Some of the drills that they were running where they were trying to do almost like a 46-man setup where they had the rest of the guys on another field, and they were only running with what would have been the game day roster. And a lot of it, when they were running that, apparently they were running with 3 defensive tackles, and people were commenting, "Oh, well, that's not realistic. You can't just run with 3 defensive tackles." And the point is, it's that those are the only 3 guys listed at defensive tackle. But when you have guys like Zoe and Shaq who can play third and long 3-tech, you can rotate those in and cover all the snaps. And that, not that they're going to do that every game, but there's a chance that Harrison Phillips could be a active, healthy scratch on some games.
I mean, yeah, and he definitely has some work to do himself. It's tough. He came in last year and he was like that early camp darling, if you
Yep.
remember. Like he was really popping early on. It was the whole Kyle Williams story, and I think he's been overshadowed a little bit with Ed Oliver. But I think Sean McDermott likes his mental toughness, and I think he'll continue to develop. He's got room to grow, and that's what Sean McDermott says he wants in all of his guys. So there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been nice so far. So let's try to take a step back a little bit and take a look at on. Let's start with the offense. Who do you think needs to step up here and need a big preseason that maybe some fans just kind of penciled in as making the roster?
You want to go offense
Yeah,
first?
let's start on offense.
You know, I wanted to go with somebody a little bit more maybe relevant. And I hate to use that term because it sounds so um, harsh, but I think Duke Williams would be the fit for me here. And the reason why I say that is because I do think a few things that he has going for him separate him from the pack. His size, his physicality, his nasty streak. There's not a lot of that on this in this wide receiver room. And so I think that those kind of characteristics make him a worthwhile study over the course of the 4 preseason games. But there's just like you see him out there with the third team, and there's not enough action. There's not enough times where I think his inability to get separation has almost forced quarterbacks, whether it be Tyree or Matt Barkley, to almost look away from him at times. He had his one big moment in practice a few days ago where he caught the touchdown pass in the end zone, got up, spiked it. It was a contested catch, his right in his repertoire there. But I just think he has to really show a lot over the next 4 games to even have a chance. And even if he does that, I think it's going to be really hard with the way that Ray McLeod has elevated himself in this whole race. And not to mention the fact, man, I think Cam Phillips is going to have a tough time making this team, but he's damn good.
Yeah, you can tell the coaches trust him. Very similar to your comments about Thompson and Mike Love. You can tell that they know Cam Phillips knows what he's supposed to do, knows what routes to run, and they reward him. He got more first team reps than a lot of the guys, Isaiah McKenzie and David Sills and Duke Williams. Cam Phillips was mixing in a lot more than those guys, and I think that's because I don't think Phillips has a realistic shot. That I have a laundry list of guys that need a big preseason. I think that some guys in the chat were talking about TJ Yeldon. I think he's on the outside looking in right now.
Definitely.
I think a lot of fans were really excited about David Sills, and then when you watch the embedded series and you saw how crazy they were going to get him locked up, I think fans took that up 3 more notches. And now, seeing him in person, I tried to warn people. I'm like, I've seen a lot of NFL athletes in my day. That guy's not an NFL athlete today. He's just not yet. And now that doesn't mean that he doesn't have the skills and the potential that's worth an investment on practice squad or whatever it is, but I don't know that he's ready for any NFL roster right now, that I'm even that worried about someone trying to poach him if we put him on waivers. And one name you brought up earlier, Jason Croom, that I think that, he needs to get himself on the field, and that obviously with so many guys injured, he could be running away and locking up the first team tight end position for game 1 if he had been healthy this whole time. But he's someone that I think needs to be on the field to show that he can make it, because depending on Tyler Kroft's progress, if they only think he needs a week or 2 and not all 6 weeks on the pup, and they have to ride him as an active part of the 53 but inactive on the 46, that might be the spot that Croom would have taken. So I think that a lot of the names rattled off there, we need to see TJ Yeldon, we need to see Duke Williams, David Sills, Isaiah McKenzie, Jason Croom, and on the offensive line maybe even Wyatt Teller be able to step up, especially now with the injury to Leadrin Waddle. Maybe they need to have an extra guy at tackle instead of the extra guard. So a lot of guys that I think can really go a long ways to help themselves.
Definitely. And you take a look at that wide receiver room, particularly, and with David Sills, it's an interesting watch out at camp, and you come away with just, what you were saying. He's just not an NFL caliber player from a physical perspective. I mean, his legs are really, really tiny. When he runs his routes, noted this on social media during the practice that it happened in. First of all, he drops more balls than any receiver in warmups. Okay, that's number one. And number two, I've noticed that when he gets any type of contact, hands put on him, bumped with a hip or a shoulder while he's in his route, he immediately comes off balance. That never happens with Cam Phillips. And even Isaiah McKenzie, to a degree, he's a much more advanced receiver from a physical perspective, and he's a slot guy. So I just think David Sills has a lot of work to do to even, convince them of a practice squad spot, because I think a guy like Nick Easley almost makes more sense because, with Cole Beasley's age and going into the fact that, he's been injured quite a bit over the course of his career. He's a tough guy. He plays through it a lot. But Nick Easley almost seems like a Cole Beasley clone. And so I think you might want to stash something like that on your practice squad. That 3.77 shuttle time from his pro day, you see it every day out on the practice field. So it's something interesting to see. And it goes back to Cole Beasley. The guy gets open every time he runs a route. Nobody could stay with him. And Nick Easley brings that kind of same skill set. So, yeah, I think David Sills was a fun story, but I think it's going to end pretty quickly
I
here.
agree. Let's flip over to the other side of the ball. Who are some of the names that you saw as someone that maybe the fans were expecting to just be kind of penciled in on the defensive side of the ball that now might need to step up in the preseason?
Well, this was harder because I feel like
The defense is a lot more set.
It's a lot more set. But you know who I think, after really digging through it all, I'm going to go with Saran Neal.
Okay.
Just because of the depth in the defensive backfield and the fact that they brought in Kurt Coleman, who's going to be their number one depth safety. And then you have Dean Marlowe, who they really, really like. And we know that Micah got hurt last year. Jordan Poyer plays a physical brand of football. So you're going to need some depth at that position. They've almost converted Saran to, predominantly that slot corner role. So he has to really show over the course of these 4 games that he can hold up, especially against second and third team talent. He'd probably, to be honest with you, to save Taron Johnson, he's probably going to get some first team reps as well at that slot corner role. So I'm very interested to see how he holds up, because if that's where they have him slotted, I think it limits you from a 53-man roster perspective if you're going to roster a backup slot corner who you don't maybe believe in as a safety, as a depth safety. And now I don't know if that's the case. I haven't talked to anybody that's put that on the record, but I want to see if he's deployed there at all, or if he is just staying right there on that slot corner
No,
spot.
I think it's a great call. We'll go through a couple of the positions here. I don't think that I honestly don't know that Eddie Yarbrough has a legit shot to make it right now. I think there's maybe, I'm going to say 80-20, that maybe there's a 20% chance that Daryl Johnson can do. I think he could have himself a Robert Foster type preseason where if he flashes a little too much, Bean could get nervous about exposing him to waivers. And even if they know Love is probably the more productive player day one in 2019, I think there's a chance that Daryl Johnson could flash enough and show some of the explosiveness that he has that they can't expose him to waivers. I think there's a chance of that. I don't think there's anyone at defensive tackle. I think that's the most solidified spot on the roster. I think at linebacker, there's not a ton. Maybe, I think Julian Sanford's a lock. I think Cory Thompson's pretty much shown himself to be a lock. So maybe there's something with Maurice Alexander versus Deion Lacey, I guess. I think that could be a thing.
And see, I think also, you mentioned Maurice Alexander. I think he's also kind of entering that lock status because of his special teams prowess and his versatility. He's converted safety. He can play that big nickel corner as well. So it's tough. There's just so many. It's going to come down to how many wide receivers do they want to keep? How many tight ends do they want to keep? Patrick DeMarco is not going anywhere. I'm sorry, Bills fans. They love him in that building, and Heath Farwell has already kind of become smitten with Pat DeMarco from a special teams perspective. So he's going to be on that roster, and that just cuts you down with how many of these guys you'd like to keep. And then you're looking at Jaquan Johnson and Avoshan Joseph, who I had marked down here, who needs a big preseason to make this team. That's a 5th round draft pick.
Yeah.
So
it's crazy it's crazy to see that, because those two names that you just brought up are two of my biggest ones I haven't heard much of anything about them other than everyone just kind of defaults to, hey, besides Austin Proehl, Brandon Beane keeps his draft picks. And that, hey, Tommy Sweeney seems to really be in position between performing well and simply being, the last man standing from a tight end standpoint, he looks pretty locked up to be able to have a good shot at it. Daryl Johnson's a seventh rounder, but he's one of those guys that's right there on the borderline from a practice squad standpoint, but has at least flashed. They've shown potential. Vosean Joseph and Jaquan Johnson they float between third team and second team. I think that Vosean Joseph's finally getting some first team special teams reps. I haven't seen Jaquan Joseph there, so I don't know if maybe he is and is mixing up a little bit there now, Jaquan Johnson, but I haven't heard much positive about any of them to get to that point. So I assume that they have a leg up over, say, a Dean Marlowe, a Deion Lacey, even a Lafayette Pitts, who probably maybe bring a little more to the table day one, but those guys were invested from a draft standpoint. But I certainly would feel a lot better about it if we saw more from them in the preseason.
Yeah, and I think for Vosean, Tyrell Dotson has really shown that he's picking things up, I think, a lot quicker, and not only making plays out there and flashing a bit on the second team. They're moving him around. He's learning the Mike spot. He's playing outside linebacker. He's playing on all the special teams. So there's significant competition at the bottom of the roster from an undrafted guy to Vosean Joseph. But I mean, he comes with those intangibles, that speed, that bend, that ability to get after the passer a little bit. So we'll see. We'll see. I think that all the stuff that's happened in the last 2 weeks has been fine, but let's now lock it away in that box that it needs to, that little training camp box that we kind of keep to the side. Now let's watch and see what they do in the games.
Absolutely. And we've seen over years, there's so many names we've rattled off in the past who were training camp darlings of Bills fans. It never panned out in the real thing. So I'm sure there's one or two of the names we rattled off for tonight that will be fun to look back at years from now. Oh, remember when we were really excited about that guy and it never panned out. But a couple quick questions here before we wrap up. I know some fans have asked about Christian Wade. I think that he got a lot of attention because of the international program, and there were some fun, rugby highlights that were out there. I know my take, and Dan was asking about it in the chat here, and Joe was commenting on it, that I'm not going to say that there's no chance he ever pans out. I think that maybe he gets the hang of it, but right now he's so far behind just from the natural instincts of things that I don't see any scenario that he is any factor beyond the free 11th man on the practice squad this year. Did you see anything different than that? You got to see more practices than I did.
Yeah, and I think that that's the plan. I don't think that the way that Sean McDermott even talks about him, I mean, there's a lot of respect for Christian Wade in that building, what he brings from just, chasing your dreams and taking a chance. I think that everybody respects that. The one area I will say that he's very, very interesting in is the return game. He looks when he takes reps in special teams drills and he runs it back. I think that's his natural element. Get the ball in his hand, that rugby kind of style takes over, and he just has to go out there and dodge tacklers. That's a very interesting kind of forward-thinking model to the Christian Wade brand. But right now, this roster is way too deep to even consider him being in the race. And I think right now, he's never been in the NFL world before. So this whole year in this program, what it's all about is getting them on the roster, not making it count against things, and letting them go through it the whole year grind. And, he's got a pretty nice running back stable to kind of learn from as well, too.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a good way to look at it. That doesn't mean it's negative. I think that that's as reasonable as we could expect from a guy who had never played organized football of any kind and now is trying to come over. We've had some good discussion tonight. I don't want to end everyone on a negative note, but there's a couple things we want to look at. I've tried to share what I think is some reasonable feedback from the drills and the activity we've seen. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how nervous are you for Mitch Morse?
6.5 out of 10.
Okay.
Is where I'm going to put it. There's definitely should be some concern. I think what we've seen over the course of the last couple of days with, him kind of running at practice and even snapping yesterday in a t-shirt and a hat, I think that those are things that you should be at least hopeful about a little bit. But when you're talking about 4 concussions documented, we don't even know if he suffered anymore in five NFL seasons, entering the 5th season. There's serious concerns there, and I mean, you start talking about if he does make it back from this one, and all early signs are pointing to that being the case. What's it going to be like if he has another one? I mean, now we're talking about serious long-term damage. So I think that there's definitely some concern. I actually talked to Brandon Beane yesterday after was yesterday the last practice. This week's
Yeah, it
all
was yesterday. Yesterday.
yesterday. So I waited for him. He was signing some off. And I mean, basically breaking it down is, we went out there and we tried to find fits from a cultural perspective, good guys, talented guys. And yeah, some of them have an injury history. Kevin Johnson too. But that's a chance you take when you're still in the process of building your roster through the draft, which I think by most accounts, expert accounts, he's done a good job of kind of stocking the shelves, so to speak, of this with this roster. And so you go out there and you take a couple chances. And if Mitch Morse comes in and doesn't suffer another concussion and plays through the whole year, you're not talking about this. And I still think he's an important piece to this whole thing. And I still think that he could come back and be a very integral part of not only this offensive line's development, but Josh Allen's development as well. But yeah, I think right now, he's kind of the key cog in that wheel. And, I think it's your other question that you're coming to, and we'll save it for that. But, I think that will impact what ends up happening with Cody Ford.
Yeah, and I think it's a good way to look at it. And my number is tough because it's a two-part combo. So this particular event by itself in a vacuum, the fact that he was immediately already up to stage 3, which means he didn't have any of the, light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, was able to immediately get back into cardio. He's already gone into simulated football activity, which puts him into the 4th stage, which means that now it's basically tolerance to get back and showing that he can do the football related activities consecutive for a full practice without any setbacks. I think we need to all kind of brace ourselves that we might not know that for 2 or 3 weeks, that they don't have any incentive to push the envelope there. I would guess that Sean McDermott would like to get 1 or 2 drives out of him in the 3rd preseason game just to kind of feel good that, hey, this is real and can get going. But beyond that, there's not a lot of value in doing that. The part that scares me is exactly what you said, is that I think fans assume that, because there's a higher propensity once you've had 3 or more concussions, it's easier to get additional ones and they can be worse. That doesn't mean that it happens 80 or 90% of the time, or it's some automatic thing that, it's going to happen. But it does mean it's a very real risk. So the part
Right.
that scares me is that, I don't know what that percentage is. And I've talked to a lot of people, I think both of us interact with Kyle Trimble here and there, and people like that, there is no set equation. There are no set percentages. There is no probability chart that you can look at of what's going to happen. It might be 20%. It might be 50%. It's somewhere in that ballpark that it's more likely that you could get another one. Out of the range of possible outcomes, there's a chance Mitch Morse could suit up for 16 games and be totally fine. There's also a chance that he could get a 5th official documented concussion and need to have some serious discussions with his family about what his future is and how this is going to work out for him as an option long term. So, individually, this particular event, I'm like a 2 or a 3. The long term ramifications of having Mitch Morse for all 4 years and a 3rd contract after that with the Buffalo Bills, I'm right up there with you as a 6 or a 7. That is certainly scares me.
And the one nice thing from a Bills perspective is Brandon Beane did a good job with the contract, and that they really aren't on the hook for much more than about half
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
So if this is something that, from a football perspective, if you're thinking about long term, listen, they filled a lot of holes in the draft this year in free agency. They can maybe go out and sign a center for the future if they think that the long term viability of Mitch Morse and his health isn't really as viable as they'd hope. So I think one of the most concerning thing is the situation behind him, because Russell Bodine cannot be
Oh,
on this
oh,
roster come September. Listen, I don't really know him personally. I haven't actually had the opportunity to talk to him too much but he just isn't very good. And it's so clear to see when he's in the game and Josh Allen is running for his life. There, it's like those are two variables that are always constantly connected. And I don't know what Spencer Long is going to look like. I know that you're probably a bigger fan of him at that spot than most people are that maybe watched him in New York last year, and he obviously had the injury. John Feliciano has some flex, but I think he's better at
Yeah.
guard from everything that I've seen as well. But
I'm going to say that the fact that they've continued to simply use Russell Bodine as the backup center and not push Long and Feliciano over to center is their kind of tacit endorsement that they think that Mitch Morse is going to be back and going to play, and he is their game plan at center. Because I think if
right.
they were really hedging in the background, and if they would never admit to it, but if they were having private discussions of, man, this might go real wrong real fast, they would simply leave. We'll get to it in a second. They would leave Ford in at guard. They'd leave Nsekhe at tackle. They'd let Spain and Dawkins be the left side, and then let Feliciano and Long compete to be the starting center. That they would just have that set up as the competition. The fact that they're letting Long and Feliciano continue to compete at guard, I read as them still having a pretty strong plan that Morris is going to be back and be their full time guy.
No, I think that's a great line of thinking. Yeah, I think that that's
So
sound.
let's jump into where that really does leave us. In that, I know everyone was very excited, and there were some people on draft night when we were looking at going into Kody Ford that had Kody Ford as the number one guard in the draft, but didn't think he could be a tackle. There were some guys that thought, hey, if you're going to draft a guy that high, you might as well try to get the tackle level value out of him. We saw, 2 weeks of good play with him at tackle that, I think the positives were there. He was able to maul guys in the run game. He was able to go through when he got his hands on guys, they were done. When he got out in space and it relied on footwork and quick movement, guys like Trent Murphy and others really got around him and made him look rough. So what do you think as far as, is Kody Ford's move to right guard permanent? Is it just for this year because of the injuries we've seen, or is it just until Morris is back and then he may go back to right tackle still this year?
I think he's going to get reps at guard and tackle throughout the preseason, um, unconnected to the Moore situation. I think that Sean McDermott, from everything that I've gathered, he wants to take a look at what everything looks like on this offensive line. I've actually been surprised that we haven't seen Deon Dawkins swing to guard at all, just to kind of get a look at it. I know that there's a few things with that because somebody brought up this one a really good point. I can't remember if it was a media person or a fan, but their thought process. Oh, actually, it was a friend of mine who's a Bills fan. He said that the thing with Deon Dawkins is he's young and he can be your left tackle of the future. So to mess with that, I think gets a little bit risky unless you really think Ty and Seki could come in here and kind of stabilize things over there for a year or two. So, but I just think that you want to optimize your line for Josh Allen right now. So I would have just liked to seen a couple looks at that. But I think that Kody Ford, he said something interesting. He told me, and listen, I'm still a novice in terms of football from a technical perspective, but he said one of the biggest differences about when you go on inside at guard is the defenders are on you much more quickly. So you have to your reaction time has to be much quicker. You have to get off the line, get out of your stance much quicker, as opposed to at right tackle. I feel like he feels like he has a little bit more time, but that might be the problem because he's not getting it done. So I think that there's so many question marks about, and that's one of, it's so interesting. They love the position flex, but I think when you bring in so many guys and draft so many guys with all this position flex, then you're kind of create this problem with a cluster of guys and not really a real role for each of them set in stone.
No, I think it's a great point, and I think it brings a couple things into play. I'm not that concerned about. Everyone keeps. I think it's funny. Bills fans have gotten the term swing tackle thrown at them more than they've ever heard in the past 6 months. And I
Right.
just want to make sure people realize, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's not a real term, but it's still backup tackle. It's not like we ran all kinds of 6-0 line sets last year and that the swing tackle is this guy who's, like the nickel cornerback or something that's playing in a prominent role. I think that when I went back and looked, we ran 6 offensive linemen like 20 total plays in the entire season last year. So it's fine. Like I wouldn't mind. I'd feel better if we still had Leader and Waddle. But if Deon Dawkins or Tyenseki go down, they're just going to kick Kody Ford back out to tackle and then put in Feliciano or Long. So even if Ford is there, now do I think that's ideal for his long-term development? The label everyone's excited about? No. So Kody Ford's still going to be better than that, even on no notice, having to switch over mid-game over to tackle. So I think they can kind of get the best of both worlds, and I would prefer that if we see Kody Ford long-term as a right tackle, that he just stay there and be Tyonseki's backup and learn the technique and be ready. But I also am selfish and I want a good 2019, and I can't make a best 5 lineman without Deon Dawkins, Tyonseki, and Kody Ford as a part of that. And the best way to do that is let Kody Ford play guard, where he can be a grizzly bear in a football uniform and just maul dudes. And, yeah, will he have to work on some things in the future next year or the year after Tyonseki leaves and he needs to move back to right tackle? Sure, but I'll cross that bridge when I get to it.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'd like to bring up is very low key. I'm not so sure that Quentin Spain might not be a problem.
Okay.
I haven't seen the kind of consistency there from Cody brought up that point. It got me to thinking you do need to be quick off the line. You do have to kind of have good footwork to be a good guard in this league. And I don't know. At times he looks very lethargic, and it's only training camp, but I don't want to overreact. And I'll be interested. And he obviously graded pretty well, especially compared to a lot of guys on the Bills roster right now. But he's slotted in there, and I would like to see how he looks compared to Wyatt Teller over the course of the preseason. It goes back to your earlier point, because at times I've still been impressed with Wyatt Teller. He has his moments where you're like, well, that is what everybody was talking about with this kid, because there was one play in camp he would absolutely mauled Ed Oliver and just stopped him dead in his tracks and pushed him back 5 yards. So I think that it's good. The competition is good, but on that offensive line, like Brandon said, like Sean said, you want to get your 5 so you can build some continuity. And I think that we're still, probably 3 weeks away from really even landing on what that's going to look like.
Yeah, no, Quentin Spain's funny because I was joking. After seeing him in person at practice, that's the widest human I've ever seen in my whole life.
He's
like
massive.
It looks like they
He's
squeezed
massive.
a refrigerator into a football jersey, and he looks like kind of like how it used to be looking at Vince Wilfork, where like, how can someone who looks morbidly obese be so explosive and athletic? And then all of a sudden you look at it and you're like, man, he still gets out of his stance and bursts out of there. And when he gets a hold of a guy, they're done. So I can't lie. He doesn't look pretty. And that would, I'm going to assume, as for some people who don't know, I've lost 120 pounds over the last 2 years. For someone who used to be morbidly obese, I can tell you, giving 100% effort on every single rep isn't in our repertoire. So I'm going to assume that Quentin Spain isn't necessarily going all out on every single training camp rep, but
Right.
when the lights are on, I think he's still got it. I don't think he's a long-term solution at left guard for the Bills, but if we can get a year or two out of it while we draft that guy or get Wyatt Teller ready, it looked like he still had it when he flipped the switch. I'm just hoping he can do that for 16 games.
Definitely. And I'm looking forward to all these kind of guys finally getting out there and playing some actual football so we can actually dive into something. Because I will say, and this is only my second camp, but I thought it was much more scaled back. It'll be interesting to see what the practices are like in Carolina, but not as much one-on-ones, especially between the offensive and defensive line. So I think from that angle, I'm definitely hungering for the games a little bit more so than I was last
No,
year.
I think you're spot on. And like you said, the work that Bean in the front office did, the scouts signing 20 free agents, having, we brought back pretty much everyone of relevance, besides Kyle Williams retiring. I don't know that there were any impact. I guess technically John Miller, Jordan Mills. I guess beyond that, we brought back 40 or 45 of the contributing players from last year, then added 20 free agents, then added an entire draft class.
All right, you brought up John Miller, so I'm going to take all of that Quentin Spain stuff back. Just scratch that out of this entire
See,
episode
it could
because
be
you
it could
just
be worse.
It could be a lot worse.
It
It could be
could
a
be
lot
worse.
worse.
So I'm actually excited about that piece of it, and I know we got Todd in the chat here that I know is an avid and most teams. Now, I think it's very debatable whether they have the same level of elite top level talent. I don't think that they match up with some of those teams that have, multiple Pro Bowlers across the board and things like that. But from a depth of talent and how the guys that we're talking about that might get cut from this team and picked up by other groups, I actually think that might translate in a preseason standpoint, that the guys playing in the third and fourth quarter where we're still running Isaiah McKenzie and Ray McLeod and Cam Phillips and Dion Lacey and Eddie Yarborough, those guys are going to be playing fourth quarter preseason minutes that were NFL roster guys last year. That I think that some of that might translate into what might be perceived as a successful preseason, even though it doesn't really correlate to anything in the regular season.
Yeah, if you're a betting man or woman, you got to have a lot of faith in one Tyree Jackson, who's going to get a lot of
Yeah.
reps this preseason. And I will say, he runs very hot and cold, and he's going to be throwing the ball to David Sills. So I would temper expectations in terms of wins this preseason, just because I don't think they're going to put him out there and put him in a situation where they're asking him to do too much. But I think that every time that guy goes down the field, it's a wobbler, and there's just too many question marks for me around his ability to read defenses, even a third team defense, and make plays consistently without making mistakes. So, but it's a big preseason for Tyree Jackson, not just even for this team, but for his NFL life. I think you go undrafted, your hometown team is the one that goes out and signs you, and now you have 4 games to prove that you can at least compete at this level, with the bottom rung of NFL rosters. So I'm very interested to see what he can
I
do.
agree.
And horns
That's
up,
right.
baby.
That's right. And I think I'm glad that he hasn't lit the world on fire. I don't want to have to carry a third quarterback on the active roster. I think he can be QB3 from the practice squad and be perfectly
Mhm.
fine and be able to be called up if God forbid something happens to Josh, and we need him as a backup to Barkley. But I don't want to see him do poorly. I want to see him go there, and I think that he's going to have some really exciting highlights. I'm also almost certain he's going to throw to the ball in the guys in the other color jerseys a couple times, but that's okay. I want to see him learn. I want to see him be aggressive and put guys into a position where I want to see Duke Williams and David Sills go up for 50-50 balls and have to fight for it on maybe not a perfect throw. So I think there can be value in that, but yeah, we might need to temper expectations that you might get 2 turnovers for every highlight from Tyree Jackson. All right, man. Help us out. Anything else here? We have had a lot of guys jump in. Thank you. The chat's been awesome tonight. You guys have been giving us all kinds of great feedback. I appreciate your patience working through this. I want to say thank you again to you, Matt. Just thank you for being patient and working with us here. New technology is always a bear. I'm really glad I got it figured out here and how to bring it out to everybody. But great time tonight. Another reminder here to check out everything we have going on at cover1.net. Download the app. Join the premium subscription. If you liked what you saw here tonight, give us a rating or a review. Check it out. We're going to continue to branch out in other areas. Eric and I have been researching how to get things going on Periscope, live from the Twitter feed, maybe bringing some things out on Instagram, being able to set up multi-stream areas so that wherever you want to watch us, you can check it out and be able to bring that. We'll continue to leave things on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, everywhere that you get your podcast, we'll still be there. So check out what we have going on. Matt, what can the people see from you, and what's your pace going to be as we get into the preseason here of what they can watch for?
Yeah, we're kind of changing, kind of our model a little bit. We're definitely pivoting a lot to kind of like the digital video and audio that we've been putting out a lot over the course of the past couple months. So definitely give us a follow over on our YouTube page. It's at NY Up, and if you arrive at it, it doesn't have any football branding on it at the moment. We're still working on that because NY Up is actually a branch of Syracuse.com. And what it is they do, obviously the Bills coverage lives there, but it's also, what are the top parks and waterfalls and all these different things around New York State. So I think a lot of people that land on it don't necessarily that all of our Bill stuff lives there, but we don't have an actual podcast yet. We're putting all of our stuff on there together. But for all of your Bills content from NY Up, follow me on Twitter at Matt Parrino. Everything kind of gets funneled through
Awesome.
there.
Thank you so much again tonight. Appreciate your flexibility jumping on. Thank you guys for sticking with us. Looking forward to it. And thank the Lord we have football back tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern time. We get to watch our Buffalo Bills kick off against the Colts. Our last final thing, Matt, give me a game prediction.
Oh, wow. No Andrew Luck. Bobby Johnson, former Indianapolis Colts assistant offensive line coach. I'm going to go with the Bills. I think they're gonna want to get this season started on the right foot. I think that Matt Barkley is going to come in that second, maybe even a little bit of the third quarter and really light it up. I'm gonna say that Matt Barkley throws 2 touchdowns tomorrow, and the Bills win by 10 points.
I like it. I like it. I think you're right in the ballpark there. I think we could see something like 27-17. I think that sounds about right. So I'm picking a Bills win as well. I think it could be a fun start to the year. I want to see some of the young guys get going, and hopefully that'll be the start of some fun things. So thank you guys for sticking with us. We will talk to you all soon. And with that, we are out.